Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the UFC Fight Night 123 breakdown. I know I originally said that I was going to do only the pay-per-view events, but I decided to do these as well because I was thinking about it and think about what it takes to get good at something. You know what I mean? Like there may be one, if you're lucky, two UFC pay-per-view events a month, and talking about those for 25 minutes a piece doesn't seem like enough to me. Like if I actually want to take this seriously and get more comfortable talking into a microphone and just getting better at it in general, not fumbling over my words, saying all the time, which I notice I constantly do as well. I think it's good to just do these fight night cards as well, especially when you got ones like this where you got a couple big names on it, but there's a lot of guys where I went back and watched their fights, and I might not have done that originally. So it's good. It's good to learn more about the sport as well. So UFC Fight Night 123 is going to be headlined by Cub Swanson and Brian Ortega, which is probably going to be a typical striker versus grappler match. I mean, I know that Ortega has a knockout over Clay Guida, I think with like a flying knee or a knee, but Clay Guida's kind of wild, you know, and that stuff probably isn't going to work against someone as technical and as he's not really a brawl. I mean, Cub Swanson is a brawler. I don't want to say it, like he gets in some pretty violent fights, but he's not a brawler in the sense like Guida. Like Guida's really aggressive, and he'll throw, like if you watch his fight against Diego Sanchez in the first round, he'll throw some wild shit, and sometimes he's just swinging and trying to knock your head off. Cub's a little bit more methodical when it comes to his striking. So I think I'm going to give the edge to Cub on the feet, and on the ground it's going to go to Ortega, whose nickname is T-City. I mean, his triangle setups are phenomenal, and it's like watching poetry in motion, watching him go through his setups and actually lock in the triangles, which it's hard to land triangles at a high level, especially like in the UFC, because first off, everyone knows they're coming. Like they'll start like fishing for your arm or something when you're in the guard, or it's hard to lock that in and actually complete the submission for a lot of different reasons. You can punch in MMA as well, which makes it more difficult. It's hard to focus on. We should probably talk about the difference between traditional jiu-jitsu a little bit and why some of the things that work in that don't work when you get into the octagon or in an MMA fight. So Ortega, if they got in just a pure jiu-jitsu match, Cub Swanson would be fucked. As experienced as he is in the UFC, I mean, Ortega is just so high level on the ground. But when you're on the ground and you're not having to worry about getting punched in the face, it's not that. I mean, it kind of is. Your jiu-jitsu has to be a little more honest in MMA in the sense it's kind of like kickboxing or like Muay Thai. Like if you have a Muay Thai fight and you're standing up and you don't have to worry about the takedowns, you can throw some crazy shit because no one's going to be firing at your legs, and it allows for like different stances. It's similar to jiu-jitsu in that sense. Like when you're on the ground, you don't have to worry about moving to a position where you're going to get punched, and you might be hesitant to go there because you know you're leaving your face open. You're able to go for more attacks, go for like some fancier submission, and especially if you're in the gi, like all these different grips become available to you, and you're ripping at like the lapel. You got different articles of clothing to work with. But it's not. The problem is it's not a jiu-jitsu fight for Ortega. It's an MMA fight, and he's going against a seasoned vet in Swanson, and it's a tough fight for both guys, really. And I mean, this is one of those fights too that you hear about all the time, where it's like the new wave is coming in and fighting like the older guy. You saw it against, not really against Cejudo and Pettis again, I guess, but a really good example is Yair Rodriguez and Frankie Edgar, because Rodriguez is like this prospect who's up and coming. He's hot. He's on a win streak, and he's fighting Frankie Edgar, who's been around the game for forever. His UFC debut was at UFC 60 something, 65 maybe. I can't remember the number, but he's been fighting for a long time is the point. And you were seeing like, is this where the new wave finally overwhelms the old school style? Like Frankie Edgar's kind of a stand, like he's got good boxing, but he's taking you down. Like, is the spinning shit and all the explosive movements that Yair Rodriguez was going to pull off, like were they going to translate against a guy like Frankie Edgar? And they didn't in that case. But this is a little bit different, right? Because I mean, Ortega. I think he's not really like his striking's improved a lot. Like he's not quite as like you knew if Yair Rodriguez was going to beat Frankie Edgar, it was probably because he landed like a head kick or something like that. You know what I mean? Something explosive. And if it went to the ground, you knew Frankie was going to have the advantage there. So he was. I don't think Ortega's quite that one-dimensional, so this fight's a little more interesting. I guess I spent some time breaking that down instead of moving to the bottom of the card first. So I guess I'll just continue talking about it instead of talking about it at the end again. I'll give you the winner for this, and then we'll work our way. We'll just work our way straight down the card then, since I started here. But Swanson, this is the problem though. All of Swanson's losses have come on the ground. And that's where Ortega wants to be. So if you can get Swanson there, you can, I mean, Ortega's got an excellent chance to finish the fight, whether he's on top or bottom. So that's going to be the key for Ortega. I mean, like I said in the beginning, this is a classic striker versus grappler matchup, and I think it's going to... If this fight stays on the feet, I think you're going to see Ortega he's going to get taught a lesson in striking. Like, Swanson's really going to go out there and give it to him and give him a lot of hard times, mix things up. I like Swanson in this fight. Like I said, seasoned vet. I know Ortega's undefeated, but that zero is going to go away at some point, and I think tonight's probably the night. Swanson's just so crafty, and so are you going to be able to get a guy like him who's seen, who's seen the likes of Frankie Edgar? Like, I know Swanson got mauled by him, but are Ortega's takedowns going to be that effective? Like, is his ability to change levels and actually get Swanson on the mat going to be that good? Like, is he going to be as good at Frankie as that? I don't think so. And if you're not at Frankie's level, is that going to be enough to get Cub on the ground? I don't know. We're going to find out. But I think Swanson's going to be able to keep things on the feet. And if it does go to the ground, probably know enough to get himself out and get back to safety before Ortega can really start locking anything up on him. I don't think Swanson will finish it. I think it's going to be a 5-round decision. Ortega might finish it. If they go on the ground, he can pull something off. But I think Swanson will win. Probably a unanimous decision. He might give up a round or two, but Swanson's pretty active. His last fight against a Korean Superboy was fantastic, and he's always moving and doesn't tire out easily. It should be a good fight. The next fight going down is going to be Knight and Benitez. And Jason Knight had an amazing fight with Chas Skelly, if you missed it, where he finished him in the 3rd round. But Jason Knight has incredible jiu-jitsu all around, like top, bottom, wherever you want to go with him. It's phenomenal. If you look at his fight with Chas Skelly, I mean, fight of the night, I think he got fight of the night. I don't know what the hell would have if it didn't. But constantly transitioning, and Chas Skelly's a high-level wrestler, and Jason Knight was just throwing up submissions on him. Very offensive off of his back. He swarms you too. Like, he doesn't. There's no resting in his jiu-jitsu game. Like, a lot of guys you'll see, they're like, when they're on their back, they're like, okay, time to take a time out. Like, I need to catch my breath. And that's what I like to see in Jason Knight, because those guys who do take their breath, who use hanging out in the guard as a means to recover, those aren't usually the guys that you see climb the ladder and fight for like UFC titles, because the gap between a UFC champion and like a middle of the road guy is so phenomenally large, and that's what high level guys do. Like, they're always working. They're not. There's no rest for them. Like, there can't be. Benitez is alternating wins and losses in his last 3 fights. He lost by Feely to head kick, I think. Beat Sam Cecilia and then just lost to Barzola. Jason Knight lost his last fight as well to Ricardo Lamas, but that's a good loss in the sense that Lamas, I think, knocked him out. But that would have been Jason Knight's 3rd loss, I think. But Lamas has fought the best of the best. I mean, he's got losses to all these guys, but he's lost to Aldo, Chad Mendez, and Max Holloway. And, I mean, those are 3 guys who are at the top of the heap in the 145 division. Like, losing to Lamas isn't bad. Like, it was a good test, and he didn't quite pass it yet, but I like Jason Knight's potential. I like him in this fight. I think he's going to finish probably in the 2nd round by submission of some kind. I don't know what, because it's hard to, like, I can't tell you what the submission is going to be, because if you watch, like, Jason Knight's so good everywhere. It's not like I'm like with Ortega, you're pretty confident that he's going to lock up a triangle of some kind or something along those lines. But with Knight, it's phenomenal everywhere. I'm sure Ortega is too. Ortega just has that specialty that we know about. Like, I am in no way downplaying Ortega's jiu-jitsu. I just think Jason Knight's is very active, and he's moving from position to position a lot. And he's got a really good guard. I think he's going to pull off a second-round submission. But he's excited. He's good enough on the feet, too, that he can knock him out. And I like the fact that Benitez is alternating wins and losses, especially. I don't like the loss against Feely. Yeah, Jason Knight, I think, in the second round. I don't think this is going to go the distance. The next fight is a good fight in the bantamweight division between Marlon Moraes, I think I'm saying that right, and Aljamain Sterling. And Moraes really made a name for himself in World Series of Fighting. He had a ton. I think he went undefeated while he was with that organization. He's got like 4 or 5 losses or something like that, I believe, over his career. But he was on a tear in World Series of Fighting. And for those of you who might not know like how this works, because I hear this a lot actually. People like when they talk about MMA is the sport, and then you have different organizations that host fighters. The UFC is at the top of the heap. I mean, you could make an argument maybe for Bellator's 170-pound division being better, but UFC always has that's the ultimate angle. You want to get to the UFC. Like, have you ever heard someone say they're doing UFC, or they like know someone who's doing UFC? That's fucking wrong. Don't listen to that bullshit. They're doing MMA. UFC is like, it's like the NFL, right? Like, you have high school, college, NFL. UFC, think of the UFC as a top tier, the top of the layer. You know what I mean? The very top layer. That's going to be what the UFC is. Then you got like Bellator, LFA, World Series of Fighting, and Bellator are probably the 2 most well-known outside of the UFC. And Dana White hates Bellator, but he's more accepting of taking fighters from World Series of Fighting. Like, Bellator had a 170-pound monster in Ben Askren, phenomenal wrestler. And I think Dana White wanted them to have like more experience, which is total bullshit. He's an Olympic caliber wrestler, never lost, and no reason for him not to be in the UFC. But they had some like disagreements and shit. Either way, World Series of Fighting seems to be a better funnel into the UFC for guys who are up and coming. And Moraes made a name there. Dropped a split decision loss to Rafael Assunção, which Assunção is a phenomenal fighter. Like, he might be the second best guy at 135. Cody Garbrandt and TJ Dillashaw are right up. I think the next fight for Cody Garbrandt is Rafael Assunção. And it's a tough fight, man. Assunção was so good. And he's got a win over TJ Dillashaw when TJ was first starting out in the UFC. And then I think it was UFC 200 that TJ beat him at. So, I mean, that's a good law. Moraes is really good. I mean, like, he's one of those guys who, kind of like Gaethje, came over and you were, like, expecting big things from him. That's kind of what we're doing with Moraes. He just picked up a split decision win over John Dodson, which I watched the fight and I thought, the judging system in MMA is a mess, too, because you got 3 guys who are picking the winners and losers of these fights. Like, in my opinion, and this would never work because you have to announce the fighters. The fighter who won right after the fight, or the crowd is going to lose interest. But I almost think you should have like a panel of judges, and you go back and rewatch the fight at least 2 or 3 times, because there are so many things that are happening. But that takes the fun out of it for the fans, right? Like, I know that's not viable, but if you're actually trying to determine who won a fight, and it makes or breaks your career sometimes. You know what I mean? Like, especially if you're not young and you've got an important fight, like, say, talk about him a lot. Frankie Edgar drops a close split decision, and it's determined by these 3 guys. But then, if you had a bigger panel, like, it's more convincing if 7, like, say you had, I don't know how many people. Let's say you had 10 even. If 6 out of 10 people decide that you want to fight, that's more convincing to me than 2 out of 3 saying that you want to fight. But I think you should be able to rewatch them. But like I said, I know that'll never work. But I think you need more judges in general. And I don't know if they do this already. They probably do. But I think you should have to wear like noise-canceling headphones so that you're not influenced by the sound of the crowd, like cheering on their hometown favorite or like a fan favorite, like Cowboy Cerrone. Like, people want to cheer for him, so like any little success he does is going to be amplified by the noise of the crowd. Like, you're going to take that into consideration. How could you not? You're there. maybe even putting them in a different room and having them watch a fight. Because the best way to watch a fight is on the screen. Because when you're sitting there looking, it gives you every angle. When you're when you're sitting there and you only have one static view of the cage, like you're not able to move, like you can't run around the cage. I think they watch a screen anyway. My point is, they shouldn't be able to be influenced by the crowd, blah, blah, blah. Stick them in a room somewhere, let them watch it on TVs, noise-canceling headphones, can't talk to each other and shit, and then put your votes in that way. In some back room, you know what I mean, where they can't hear anything the crowd's doing. Anyway, got sidetracked there. But Moraes is a phenomenal fighter, good stand-up, good everywhere, and he's fighting Aljamain Sterling, who... These guys both have mutual losses to Rafael Assunção, though. But Sterling already has 8 fights in the UFC, so he's been fighting guys at the top of the heap for a while. And I know World Series of Fighting is good, but it's not UFC good. Like, these guys are coming up to it's a whole different world when you get there. There are levels to everything you do, right? Like, you might have a stud... Like, let's get back to the high school, college, NFL reference. Like, a stud high school quarterback might not even survive at the D1 level, let alone be able to make it through the D1 level and get to the NFL. Think of that with how fighting works. Like, you got guys who can compete in World Series of Fighting, and then once you make that next step up to the UFC, that talent is so... Like, that leap in talent is massive, especially when you're fighting guys... like John Dodson and Rafael Assunção. Assunção being Moraes' debut that's a tough fucking fight to come into the UFC and try to get your first win on in the UFC. So Sterling's been doing this a while, which gives him a little bit of an advantage there. Also, Sterling beat Renan Barão, and if you don't know who Renan Barão is, he ruled the 135-pound division, which is bantamweight, after Cruz got hurt and before he lost to Dillashaw. And he was on like a 9-year winning streak. He actually lost his pro debut and then rattled off 32 wins in a row. 32 and like no losses, just 32 straight. That's phenomenal, and that's hard to do. But a lot of the time, like, you got to take the win, Sterling's win over him, with a grain of salt, because a lot of the times after fighters like when they're at the top of the mountain for so long and they finally lose, it's like that air of invincibility that's around them just kind of falls. And then guys start beating them. Like, so after that, who did Renan Barão lose to? He lost to TJ Dillashaw, he got knocked out, and then he got knocked out again, I believe. But then he also dropped like a unanimous decision to Jeremy Stephens. And you got to wonder, if he never lost to TJ, would he lose to Jeremy Stephens? It like affects you somehow. Like, remember when Ronda Rousey got knocked out by Holly Holm, then came back and just got lit up by Amanda Nunes? Chris Weidman, kind of the same example. Like, he was going on this tear. His isn't as impressive, though. I guess a better example, Anderson Silva's not a great example either, because he hurt himself. Like, he had that nasty leg injury, and he kind of never looked the same after that. Rousey's probably the best example I can give you. Like, where Holm knocked her out, and then, like, she was at the top of the world, and then it comes down, and then you start realizing that, oh, wait, she can be beat. Like, she's not this superhuman. I think that is eventually going to happen to Demetrius Johnson, too, where you're going to see... Like, if TJ could beat him, for example, I think people be like, oh, like that target that I've been gunning for so long. Just, like, I just realized that it can actually be achieved. And it, like, boosts you, and it makes everyone in that division will get better. Like, it brings, like, a step up in competition. But maybe Demetrius is just so fucking good that'll never happen. That's a very good possibility. Anyway, Sterling, great on the feet, active. Keeps his hands down, moves a lot. He switches stances a lot, too. But very composed, coached by Sarah Longo. So awesome jiu-jitsu. He has a lot of attacks from the bottom, and he always looks comfortable in the fight. Like, he's never stressing out. He's very athletic. Good attacks from the bottom. Like I said, very offensive. And he does a good job of managing distance. You saw that in the fight against Barão, especially in the second and third round. And he when he can put the pressure on you, he does really well with keeping himself far enough away where he's hitting you and just getting out of the way of punches and coming back and countering. He's very good at that. Very good on his feet. I like Sterling in this fight. But this is a toss-up to me. This is like a pick-em. Moraes could come out, and I think it'll probably be a decision. I don't think these guys are going to finish each other, but maybe another close fight. Moraes' first two fights in the UFC have ended in split decisions. He was on the good end of one and the bad end of another. So maybe another split decision fight, honestly. But I'm going to get with Sterling. I'm going to give him the edge. I just like the fact that he's already had 8 UFC fights, so he knows what it's like to fight at this level. And that's not discrediting Moraes. Like, he's phenomenal. But I like Sterling in this fight. The next fight, excuse me, I'm coughing, is Daryl Horcher versus Scott Holtzman. Scott Hot Sauce Holtzman. He got that nickname because he likes to put hot sauce on things. Like, doesn't pertain to fighting at all, but then, oh boy. Anyway, this is going to be a lightweight fight, so 155 pounds. Holtzman has 5 UFC fights where he's alternated wins and losses. Like, win, loss, win, loss, win. And his most recent fight was, he picked up a win over McBride. And McBride was this awkward, long guy, good at jiu-jitsu, but he had this weird square stance, and I thought it allowed Holtzman to really start landing combos on him. Like, I don't know how to explain it, but like, when that lead shoulder's not out there, your hands, like, to stand square against someone, when you can throw as many weapons when you can have as many weapons thrown at you as you can in the UFC, like legs and knees and elbows and arms are coming at you. I don't know. It's hard to tell if Holtzman's going to have success against a guy like Horcher, who doesn't fight like that, who's got a really, like, he's got a good, like, traditional boxing stance. Anyway, I like Holtzman's movement. He's very active, bouncing in and out, and he has a nice step-in left hook. Like, that lead left is really nice, and then he always follows it up with a right. Unless he, like, puts you down, he's following it up with the right hand. And the right hand has a pop behind it, too. A lot of head movement, too. Like, there are some guys, like Horcher's, I'll talk about this in a minute, but Horcher's one of those guys who, like, doesn't move his head a ton. Holtzman's always bouncing around and moving his head. It's constant. He's very active. His top game had me worried a little bit. He didn't really look to transition in his last fight. He just kind of was comfortable with sitting there and pounding on the guy's face, which was fine. And he looked to have good cardio. These guys are fighting at 155, but he looked good going into the third round. He was moving a lot more than the McBride guy, who had never seen fight before that. But this is an interesting fight because Horcher, he got fucked. He got fucked from Jump Street because they made him fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. And he got about 9 days' notice. And to his credit, he looked comfortable in there. And this is a fight, like, you got to understand, the people, you're probably like, well, why didn't Khabib fight someone else, like someone who's already on the UFC roster? Because that's a risky fight for guys at the top of the heat. Like, you can't prepare for Khabib Nurmagomedov in 9 days. If you're someone, for example, like, this wasn't the fight that could have potentially happened, just throwing a name out there, like Tony Ferguson, you're not going to take that fight on 9 days. Because Khabib is so good and it can hurt your stocks so much if you lose. But when you're a guy who's just trying to make a name for himself and break in to the UFC and, like, fulfill your dream of fighting on that stage, this is a good fight to take, in the sense that you're fighting huge names, so your name's going to get thrown out there immediately. And if you win, you're an instant star. And if you lose, well, people are like, fuck it, you were supposed to lose. So he got fucked there. He was staying patient, calm, like, he looked good throughout the first round, but when Khabib gets a hold of you and gets you down, man, there's no getting up. Like, he's probably the best wrestler. Maybe that, I don't know about his credentials and stuff. Like, I don't know, maybe he was in the Olympics. I don't know. I should probably know that. But it's just so suffocating. Like, he ragdolled Rafael dos Anjos. So there's absolutely no shame in losing your debut on 9 days' notice to Khabib. I was talking earlier about those level jumps that you go through. That's like, and then there's the gap. There's not only the gap to get into the UFC, like those guys already fighting in the UFC are kind of at the bottom. Like, the jump from, like, World Series of Fighting to there is massive, but then to jump all the way up to the top tier, like that championship level, that's another massive gap. So, not a bad loss there, and then he pulled off a split decision, which I thought was a bullshit decision. Back to the judging. They need to do something about this. He dominated that fight. He had gotten a little bit of trouble in the third round, but he did enough to win a unanimous decision, in my opinion. I don't know how someone gave the rounds to the guy that he fought. Horcher, like I said, very calm. He looked good. He does really well in the pocket. And, like, so, like I said, I was going to talk about this in a minute. Horcher's head movement. There are guys who like stand there and their head's moving with their body as they're like kind of sitting in their stance. And then there's guys like Holtzman who are in and out, always moving their head, very active. Horcher's that guy who like you see his head movement when someone throws the combo at him or when he's throwing the combo. Like not until then. Like he's not wasting a lot of energy until someone does something, then he's reacting to it. The guy that Horcher just fought, Powell, he was a long guy too. And that was interesting because you got to see how he dealt with distance. Like how guys who are longer than him, like are you able to get into the pocket and throw those combos and get on top, like get your takedowns and stuff? And he was able to do that. Like I said, he got in some trouble in the third round and stuff, but I thought he won the fight clearly. I like Holtzman in this fight. But again, another fight that could go either way. Holtzman, I just like how Holtzman's always moving, and he does really good at getting in, landing his combos, and getting out. But like I said about Horcher and his how he likes to sit there and wait for you to throw, like maybe he'll be able to sit in the pocket and counter those though. I think Holtzman's got to pressure him up against. If Holtzman wants to win the fight, he's got to get him against the fence, and not give Horcher the room to sit there and throw those counters. Like you kind of want to cut off some of his angles, and get him in a position where he can't move a whole lot, because he's going to have to rely on good head movement when those punches are coming from Holtzman. I like this fight to stay standing, and I think it's going to end in a knockout, but I don't know on whose end. I think Holtzman. I'm going to give it to Holtzman, but this is another toss-up. I mean, I think Horcher could definitely sit there and get the counters going when Holtzman's coming in with that lead left. We'll see, though. That lead left is going to be... Because, like I said, in the last fight, he's fighting a guy who was standing square to him. Like, is he going to be able to do that against a guy like Horcher? I'm not sure. And I only did the top 5 on this one because I didn't know who the fuck the first 2 guys fighting on the card were. So I just did the top 5 fights. So next, moving down again, is going to be Eric Anders versus Perez. This is going to be Perez's UFC debut. He was a middleweight champion, which is 185 pounds in LFA. He's got some really slick jiu-jitsu. He pulled off a nice first round submission, a quick submission win in the first round. And Eric Anders is he went to Alabama actually and played as a linebacker. I don't know if he started. Maybe some of you guys who are huge college football fanatics recognize that name. But he's an Alabama linebacker when they won the national title in 2009. He's got really good counters and a big left hand. And he's got kind of a weird stance. He's a southpaw and he sits back. It's almost like he's leaning back over his left shoulder. You'll see what I mean if you watch the fight. It's awkward, but it's effective. I mean, he's landing big shots, and he beat Rafael Natal, which is a good win. And this is in Anders' UFC debut. Keep in mind, like Natal's not phenomenal, but that's a tough first fight to come into the UFC and get a win, and he made it look fucking easy. I mean, he dominated them. Natal has a win over Uriah Hall, which might be a name that some of you guys recognize, but he's a really explosive. Hall's kind of timid though, right? Like, I know that's a good win, but Hall, it kind of depends on what Uriah Hall's showing up that night. Either way, Natal has beat Hall, and for Anders to come in his UFC debut and beat Natal that's a tall task, and he pulled it off. I mean, very composed, and that's a huge win. That's a huge win to pull off. He was strong. I mean, you're gonna notice that right away. I mean, he played fucking linebacker at Alabama. Like the kid he's gonna be an animal. Calm on the ground. He knocked Natal out in the first round too. Oh man, I think Anders is gonna win this fight. I always say I think MMA is the hardest sport in the world. Like to get to a very high level, like the level that like guys like Demetrius Johnson, John Jones, Conor McGregor, Eddie Alvarez, the list goes on and on, right? But to get to that level, I think it's the hardest thing in the world. That's not saying that they have the most athletic guys in the world. Because obviously, I think if you got some of these animals who are playing over the NFL to come into fighting, and that's what they focus their time on, they'd be phenomenal at it. Like, even in the NBA, like guys like someone as athletic as LeBron James fighting, like, you could teach that guy anything, right? And same with like these, especially like, I think of Anders is a perfect example. I think of linebackers, right? These super athletes who are thick and strong and like, they're just freaks of nature. And you don't sometimes like there are a couple guys who you do see in the UFC who probably could have done like almost anything they wanted, right? Like I look at George St. Pierre, he's undersized to like play in the NFL, but he's a super athlete. I mean, he's incredible. And John Jones is another example. Like you get a couple of those freaks in there and look what they're able to accomplish. TJ Dillashaw too. He's like a little mini freak. Like he could probably never play a professional sport because he's so fucking little. I don't know. Maybe can you play soccer if you're little? I don't know. But he's a phenomenal athlete as well. And that's what I like about this Anders kid. Because he looks good, too. Like, you're going to see him and he looks smooth. He's very smooth on his feet. But going back to those athletes that could potentially fight, the money's just not there. Like, if you have a chance to make however many $1 million playing quarterback in the NFL or going to fight and get your fucking face bashed in for $20,000 a night, and you might get 2 or 3 fights a year, and then you got to pay your camp, you got to pay your nutritionist, you got to pay for all the other fucking shit you're doing on the side. Like, it's not just a free ride once you're in the UFC. Like, you got dues to pay. So to make $60,000 a year, without unless you get like a fight night bonus where you get $50,000, that's fucking crazy. I think TJ Dillashaw at UFC 200 made $25,000. That's insane. They're so underpaid. Like, none of these freak athletes are going to come and be like, yeah, if you notice, too, like, these fighters, it's always like a former linebacker or a former NFL player. You know what I mean? Like, a former whatever, blah, blah. Because, like, no one's trying to get into MMA first if you're a freak athlete. Like, you're trying to get your full ride to college and make it to the pros. But it's nice when these guys... And imagine, like, Anders isn't even, like, an NFL caliber guy. Like, he's not that freak athlete. You know what I mean? Like, imagine... I know he just got hurt the other day, but imagine a guy like Ryan Shazier fighting. Like, as big as he is and as fast as he is, like, imagine a guy like that coming into, like, MMA and focusing all of his time on it. I mean, maybe we'll start seeing more of that as the UFC, like, starts to pay their fighters better if they do, but it's still going to be, you're going to get those guys going to those big money sports. But Anders is a guy who fell into the UFC's lap, and I think he could potentially be a star. I like him to win. I like him to knock Perez out in the first round. I like the power. If not, I think he'll get him in the second. Perez might win. I don't know. Also, this is his UFC debut. And if you haven't fought in the UFC, I probably fucking haven't seen you fight. Unless you're like a big name over in Bellator, like a Michael Chandler or Rory McDonald's there now. It's so hard to keep up with other organizations. Like, there's enough fighters in the UFC to keep up with. Like, it's work to keep up with them all. So if you haven't fought in the UFC, I haven't seen you fight, and I don't know, you're probably going to get the snub most of the fucking time. Unless you're a guy like Justin Gaethje coming in, or like Moraes. I'm probably going to just hand you a loss on your UFC debut every time, which isn't fair, but I should probably go watch. I plan to. Like, I plan to start watching more fights if I'm going to do this from other organizations. But, oh man, I don't like him against Anders in this fight. I think Anders has some serious potential to be a contender at 185. If he can keep developing and growing and put the same work ethic that got him to be a national champion, like on a national champion football team, like if that work ethic can translate to MMA, he's going to be able to do some special things. I think that's it. Like I said, I don't know who the first 2 fighters on the card are. So, to recap, we have got Cub Swanson, probably, I can't remember what I said now, I think by decision. Knight, Sterling, Holtzman, and Anders, now I think about it. Eric Anders? That sounds right. Maybe it's Anders, though. To go back to what I said earlier about MMA being the hardest sport in the world. The reason I say that is because think about all the things that you have to worry about. Like, even in a combat sport like boxing, you're focusing on one thing. Like, you're just developing your hands. You're not worrying about, like, the kicks. You're not worrying about the knees. You're not worrying about the elbows. You're not worrying about jiu-jitsu. You're not worrying about, like, all these different variables going to MMA, and you have to be good at all of them. Like, you can't just be a good boxer. It's going to get exposed. Like, you're going to get taken down by some high-class wrestler, and he's going to punish you for the length of the fight or until he finishes it. Like, you can't be a one-dimensional fighter in the UFC. You have to be good at everything. A lot of guys have specialties, but they have enough knowledge of the other variables of MMA that it can back up and let their specialty shine through. Cody Garbrandt's a good example. Like, he has a good wrestling background, but you know he's a boxer. And he can box your fucking face off. But it's not all that he's good at. Like, the reason his boxing is successful is because he has a background in other disciplines. And I know, like I said, there's more athletic guys. Like, the competition is probably harder to get into leagues like the NFL and the NBA, but that doesn't mean the sport is harder. Like, in every other sport that I can think of, if you fuck up, you always get a second chance. Like, a chance to redeem yourself. Like, if you're in the NFL, you throw an interception, fuck it. Next drive, you get to go out and try again. You know what I mean? Like, there's always an opportunity to keep winning. And in MMA, it's not like that. And even in boxing, like, you get knocked down, you get a 10 count. Oh, you're good to go, yeah. Like, in the UFC, if you get head kicked or hit with, like, a clean hook and you go to the ground, there's no, like, fucking around, like, whoa, give me a minute. I need, you know, that, if you look at the Cody Garbrandt-TJ Dillashaw fight, the difference in that fight that allowed TJ to get in and land the left hook, to hit him with the right, to put him away, was the fact that Cody got head kicked and his hand was by his chin. And if that hand comes up like 2 inches, that probably takes away a lot of the damage that TJ's kick was going to inflict. And then lets you get back and recenter and, you know what I mean, like, refocus. But instead, Cody got fucking cracked and dropped. And that difference in inches is so consequential. Like, I know they say football is a game of inches, and they're a little like, don't get me wrong, I understand that the margin for error when you get up to elite level play is extremely small. But you always have a chance to redeem yourself in a sense. That's not the case in fighting. Like, as soon as you get tagged or dropped, or, like, if you leave your arm hanging in the guard and, like, you get caught in a triangle, like, the consequences for making mistakes is so, in my opinion, so much larger, because there's no chance to go back and redo that. Like, that, if you get dropped and you are just laying there and, like, not defend, you always have to be active. And you can just, like, there's no, the guy doesn't leave you an opportunity to recover yourself. He's on you immediately. And you're dealing with all that while you're hurt. Think about that. Like, you're not just trying to fend. It's not like you're laying in some guy's guard just, like, fending him off you. You're fucking rocked. Like, you just got dropped. You got hit with the right hand or a high kick. And you're, like, sitting there and there's spots everywhere and you're confused, but you're still trying to, you're just in survival mode. And it's so, point is, the mistakes are far more consequential than in other sports, in my opinion. And there's so many things that you have to worry about, and there's no one to help you. It's just you and this guy fighting. Like, it's not, even, like, think about one-on-one sports, like, I mean, tennis or something, you know what I mean? Like, oh, they got a point this time? Oh, well, okay, I'll get the point the next time. Like, that doesn't happen in the UFC. You always have to be on your toes and active. But that is it. This one was a little bit longer because I was bullshitting for forever. The Fight Pass prelims are about to start, so I'm going to get off here and watch this. Take it easy, guys. Bye.